forward to just providing a really high-level overview of the accreditation system, and as well as with the process itself. So we will be working through this presentation, but I really encourage you to post your questions or your comments in the chat box on the right-hand side of the screen, and we'll just stop as we get the questions to answer them. This is really an opportunity for you to ask whatever you've always wanted to know about the accreditation system. I am recording the webinar, so after we finish this, I'll send out the recording to you all along with a copy of the slides. And so, as I said, our focus today is going to be on the big picture for the accreditation system. Just a little bit of history about the system. We'll talk through the accreditation process, as well as just a high-level overview of the standards and what it means when we talk about alignment to the standards. What is the evidence that programs provide to demonstrate that alignment to the standards? And I'm really pleased to be joined today with my co-presenters. Dr. Martha Munoz, who is a member of our Commission on the Accreditation of Early Childhood Higher Education Programs, is with us today to provide the Commission perspective and answer any questions you might have about the Commission's work with the accreditation system. And I'm also joined by my great colleague, Pamela Ehrenberg, who is our Director of Accreditation Services at NAEYC.
Hi, everybody. Great to meet everyone.
And so I just want to turn this over to Martha to just provide a little bit of overview of the Commission role in the system and to provide some greetings to you all. Martha?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me, Mary?
Yes, we can hear you. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Good afternoon. I'm Martha Munoz, and I am on my third year on the Commission. And the role of the Commission is to determine accreditation decisions regarding early childhood programs in higher education at both the 2-, 4-year and graduate level. The Commission has a really clear structure, policies, and procedures that we follow making accreditation decisions. And the Commission is comprised of individuals from early childhood, different types of programs and geography. So we really strive to adhere to, you'll be hearing more about the Association of Specialized and Professional Accreditors and the Council for Higher Education Accreditation, CHIA, as well as the Department of Education. We serve as a body that reflects NAEYC commitment to being a high-performing, inclusive organization. And our Commission is a voluntary entity. So just something that is we're all very committed to, devoting the time to be very thorough in all of our reviews. And I'll stop there because I'll talk a little bit more about the Commission later.
Great, thank you, Martha. And I think, yeah, that's a really, just want to build on what you said, is that our accreditation system, the process itself, should look very familiar to all of you. It's structured in a very similar way to other higher education accreditation systems. So as we walk through the process and the kinds of evidence that we're looking for in the system, hopefully you'll see some alignment to what you may already be involved with your regional accreditors or other accrediting bodies that accredit programs on your campus. So I wanted to, before we dig into the process, just provide a little bit of the why accreditation, why is accreditation important, and a little bit of the history of the accreditation system itself. And I wanted to set this into the context of the work that we're doing in Power to the Profession, this work that NAEYC is doing in conjunction with many other early childhood education organizations to create a framework around the profession, to provide some consensus around the kinds of competencies we expect in early childhood educators, to define what an early childhood educator is, and to think about, as we really try to move into becoming a full-fledged profession, all those different components of the profession that are really important. And so when we think about the role of accreditation in a profession, and these you'll see on the screen right now are really common components in any profession. And you'll see number 10 there is accreditation, that in any given profession, the self-governing mechanism is really important measure of accountability within the system. And we see NAEYC's accreditation system very much in that light, that this is a system that the programs that have moved through this, it's voluntary. They are holding themselves accountable to ensuring that their graduates are prepared in the competencies and standards that we lay out in NAEYC's professional preparation standards. And so this is, we hold the quality of the system very important and the integrity of the system very important. And you'll see I've highlighted in blue some of these other components of a profession, the expectations and standards for practice, the assessment for a professional entry, the practicum, the clinical requirements. All of those pieces are part of our accreditation system. So as we work through the process today and go through that, hopefully you'll see some of these other elements of the profession and how they're related to the accreditation system itself. And even beyond that work, accreditation matters for many, many reasons. As we think about accreditation in general, one of the key important features of any accreditation system is that we want it to support degree program quality and continuous improvement. So it's a lever for accountability in the programs, but just as importantly, it's a lever for continuous improvement, for quality improvement within the programs. And we've seen that evidenced in the system, and what faculty really value about going through this accreditation process is that it has helped develop that culture within the program around continuous improvement. Accreditation also serves as assurance to the candidates in the program and prospective candidates in the program. When they see that accreditation seal, they can be assured that that program is going to prepare them to be ready for the early childhood profession, that they're going to have the knowledge and the experiences, the practicum experiences that will prepare them for their early childhood careers. And ultimately, accreditation is a key part of the development of the early childhood workforce. As we go through accreditation, this is the accreditation experience, the journey. It is about supporting building that strong pathway from recruitment to completion in the early childhood program. When you are in the self-study phase, you will be examining every part of your program, from that recruitment to completion to what happens after completion. And so you really will be looking at your programs with a critical lens to identify where you have the strengths in your programs and where are those areas for development. Accreditation, it's also served as a way for programs to build out and strengthen their relationships with their local schools and early learning settings. And so that's been another benefit of the accreditation system. And we also see accreditation, it's a way for programs to look at how they measure their candidates' readiness for the classroom, the school setting, the early learning setting, and to think about how they measure impact on their programs, and to think about what data is showing them how their candidates are learning the standards and applying the standards. And we've had as a long-standing principle within our accreditation system is that we want this to be a mechanism to support articulation between degrees. And so as all the programs that go through our system, regardless of degree level, we are holding them to the same standards. And so we see that as a way to really facilitate articulation between the degree programs, because there is a common understanding of what is being taught in the programs, what students know are able to do when they complete their degrees. And accreditation benefits many different stakeholders, and I won't run through this whole list, but we see that there are many stakeholders that are part of this accreditation system, from the candidates to the faculty to the employers, for those who are hiring the graduates of the programs. And of course, we see accreditation as an accountability mechanism that's meaningful to the public as well. So just a little bit about NAEYC accreditation. So accreditation, it's really focusing, and our standards really focus on the expectations for the early childhood educator. And I've taken from here, if you've been following Power to the Profession, in that first decision cycle of that work there, that was really focused on identifying who the early childhood educator is, as well as what are those responsibilities of the early childhood educator. And so we recognize in our degree programs that you are preparing candidates for a multitude of roles and settings within the early childhood field. And through the accreditation and through these standards, though, we are setting an expectation that regardless of where candidates serve after they finish in their programs, that they have some core knowledge and abilities in relation to the early childhood educator role. And so that's the focus of the accreditation system and of NAEYC's professional preparation standards. And so as you look at the responsibilities here, you'll see that those map quite well to NAEYC's professional preparation standards in terms of the expectations that are laid out there for early childhood educators. And so here I also wanted to just set this in the accreditation system and how we are situated within NAEYC as a larger organization. And as you may know, we have a strategic direction here and a set of priorities that we're really focused on. And one of those key priorities is this priority listed in green. So the early childhood profession exemplifies excellence and is recognized as vital in performing a critical role in society. And built within that priority is our work around preparation, high quality preparation, which higher education is. It's very much a higher education. The work is focused on consensus around the professional expectations, the standards that we have, as well as the accreditation system and how we hold programs accountable for those standards and build in continuous improvement around achieving those standards. So just some fast facts about the accreditation system and where we currently are. There are 195 institutions that have accredited programs, and so we have a total of 231 accredited programs. The vast majority of these are currently at the associate degree level because, as you may know, for the first 10 years of our accreditation system, we accredited solely at the associate degree level. This past year, we have opened the system up and we now accredit through the master's degree level. And we're really excited because we just accredited our first set of baccalaureate degree programs this summer. So we have many more in the pipeline at the baccalaureate and master's degree level that are moving through the system now. But it was a really important decision that we made as a commission and an organization that we wanted to have an accreditation system that was open to all early childhood programs across degree levels. As we worked through toward Power to the Profession, we wanted to make sure that there was this accountability mechanism that was open to all programs. So we're really excited about this expansion. And we have accredited programs now in 39 states, and we have almost 200 peer reviewers who are absolutely vital to the health and the functioning of this accreditation system. So we'll talk more about the role of peer reviewers in just a little bit. And I just wanted to acknowledge too, because for those of you who may be in representing baccalaureate or graduate degree programs, we also have a long-standing partnership with CAPE, and we serve as the early childhood SPA with CAPE. And so we recognize programs at the baccalaureate and graduate degree level through that system. But that system is only open to licensure programs and only to programs that participate in CAPE. So this was another reason why we've expanded the accreditation system because, as we all know, there are a multitude of non-licensure early childhood programs at our institutions, and there are hundreds of institutions that are not part of the CAPE system. So we've laid out here, and if you're interested in knowing better sort of the differences between the two systems, we have information on the NAEYC website about this too. But we use the same standards across both of our accreditation system and the recognition system. But the accreditation system is a much more in-depth review of the early childhood degree programs. It's a much more extensive self-study. There's there's a site visit involved, and we have a commission that makes the accreditation decisions there. The mission of our accreditation system is that it sets that standard of excellence for the degree programs, and then we recognize programs for meeting those standards. And this last part that's highlighted in red, we take very seriously. We want the system to benefit the profession, the young children, and their families, and the communities. And so you'll probably hear us say this over the webinar, and if you're in other sessions with us, if you move through the accreditation system and you get to points where you're not seeing the benefit, that is the perfect time to call us. We want this to be a process that supports your program, that moves you closer to the goals that you might have for your program in terms of program quality. And we want you to be successful in your accreditation journey. So we take this very seriously and encourage programs to call us as they move throughout the accreditation process. And I've mentioned some of these previously, so I won't run through all of these, but we have principles that guide the work that we do. I'll highlight this first one. This is a rigorous process, but we don't want it to be unduly burdensome. And this gets back to that notion that we want this to be beneficial to you, but it is designed to be rigorous and to help you look critically at your program, to identify those areas that are strengths in your program, and to look closely where there needs to be development as you think about your program in the context of NAEYC's professional preparation standards. And so, as I said, we have almost 200 institutions that have achieved accreditation and are currently accredited, and I've just captured some of the common things that they say about NAEYC Higher Education Accreditation, and we're really proud of this, and we work hard to make sure that these continue to be the words that describe the system. So this is meant to be a credible system, that it's a positive experience for the programs, that it's a reflective experience as they go through this. And we've seen as we've surveyed programs about the benefits of accreditation and what have been some of those intended and unintended consequences of accreditation, programs most often cite what's listed here. They've seen a real increase in local recognition for their programs, that it's really provided and elevated those programs within the communities. It's helped enhance recruiting efforts into the program. They have the accreditation seal, and that's meaningful to prospective students as they seek out programs. And it's increased visibility for the program at the institution. A lot of faculty who have gone through this have commented that, particularly in the site visit process, it was a wonderful way to highlight this work to the presidents and provosts in terms of not just the early childhood degree program on campus, but the importance of early childhood education in general and the role that program serves in the community. And a lot of our faculty have noted, for better or worse, that as they've gone through the accreditation process, they often get tapped to help with other accreditation efforts on the campus as well. So I'd like to turn this over now to my colleague Pam to walk through the process and talk a little bit more about evidence for meeting the standards.
Thanks so much, Mary. And it's really great to be here with all of you. As we start to think about the actual process of going through for accreditation, we like to point out that the very first piece on that list, on this next slide, submitting the application, is kind of pulled off a little bit to the side from the other one. And the reason for that is that we really do encourage programs to go ahead and apply and through that self-study process as soon as you know that you're going to be moving forward with it. So we know that it is not a quick process in many cases, that there's work to be done within the program and at the institutional level, but we very much want, as Mary was saying, to be supportive of you in that effort. We really want to be here along with you to provide resources, and submitting the application is the way to formally welcome yourself into the community of programs. You'll have access to an online resource library where we have various materials, recordings of past webinars like this one. You'll have various materials that we've been developing to help you through that self-study process. So we really do encourage you, and as I scrolled through the list of attendees, I see that there are some representatives here from programs that are currently in self-study, so special welcome to you. Definitely feel free to chime in the chat box if that would help to encourage some of your colleagues and help us reflect on your experiences. So you'll see that the application is also the first stage where there is a fee associated with it. It's a pretty nominal fee of $563, and the application is just a one-time process. After you know that your program is eligible, you enter into that self-study phase, which can last for up to 5 years, and programs really do take a range of time periods within that. During the self-study process, you'll be implementing program changes. You'll be starting to collect data related to how your candidates are doing on the standards, various, as Mary said, answering some of the different questions that you would like to know to help prepare for your program growth. When you reach what feels like a culmination of the self-study process, you'd be submitting the self-study report. That, again, is the next stage where there's a fee associated with it, so it could be up to 5 years in between that application and submitting the self-study report. We accept self-study reports any time of year, but there are two cycles that we consider in terms of getting ready for site visits and such. So we're just getting ready for a submission deadline of September 30th. And those programs will then be preparing for site visits the following spring. The next cohort then would be the programs that submit their self-study reports by March 31st, and they would be planning on a site visit the following fall. In that year of the site visit, there is an additional fee. That's the $6,500 referred to on, it looks like about the fourth line there. That covers the direct and indirect costs associated with the visit. So focused on, all of the actual expenses that are visible, like the airfares, hotels, things like that, as well as the staff support processing of arranging travel, sending reimbursements for reviewer expenses and things like that. That's all folded in, so that by paying one site visit fee, programs told us that was a big improvement in allowing them really to focus on getting ready for the actual substance of the work of the visit. It looks like we have a couple of questions coming in. It's like, okay, Mary may respond to some up above.
So one of the questions, Pam, was we'd like to start the self-study process before we do the application. Is that a good idea?
I think the actual intent of self-study, programs can get started at any point. I think it really is often helpful for programs to go ahead and apply and have access to all the materials and resources as early in the process as possible. We sometimes will hear from programs that they spent lots and lots of time reconfiguring all of their rubrics and data tables, let's say, to organize it in a certain way that they thought was required, and that once they formally applied to the system, realized what the actual requirements were, they realized, oh, well, we spent all those hours doing such and such that wasn't actually necessary. So I think the application is a pretty quick, in terms of answering demographic questions and such about your program. It's not a time-consuming process, and so that seems to open the gateway to a lot of resources. If there's programs that have had other experiences and feel like, that there's benefits the other way, feel free to chime in the chat box, and we can consider pros and cons of that. But primarily, it seems like applying and then beginning the self-study work is the most common path.
Mm-hmm.
And Martha, I would echo that as well. Just the sense of community and resources available once you have gone to the application phase, I think is a very supportive environment. So I would also encourage programs to go ahead and submit applications.
Mm-hmm. Right. Great, and it looks like we have a couple questions around cost as well. So one of the questions was, what's the grand total for the accreditation cost? And so we can answer from a couple of ways, and Pam, I'll stop interrupting Pam in just a second. But you can.
I was going to defer that one to you, especially for the funding suggestions.
Good. But as you look at what on the screen here, so this lays out the costs for the accreditation system. So to reach an accreditation system, to get to that place where you receive the commission decision, totaled up, that'll be around $8,600. But you'll pay at different points. So you'll pay at the point of submitting the application, you'll pay a fee when you submit your self-study report, and then you pay the fee for the site visit fee. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So that the payments are spaced out, and as Pam said, people take different periods of time to complete self-study. Some might complete it in a year, others might take 2-3 years, or may need the full 5 years to really complete that self-study phase. So you can pace the payments in a sense as you go through self-study. And then if you receive a positive accreditation decision, you do pay an annual fee. And so you'll see that listed on here as well. So you'll pay that annual fee during the time that you are accredited. There was another question about funding. How do you pay for this? Because we recognize that one of the biggest barriers to any accreditation is the cost of the accreditation. And so some programs have been able to utilize some state funding streams that they might have. And so looking through preschool grants and some other funding to support that work. Sometimes if institutions are part of a larger institutional system, they've been able to tap into some funding through that system. So, and other times we have, I know a couple of affiliates that have really supported accreditation, and they will provide funding, particularly around professional development for the programs that are going through the accreditation process itself. So there's some different ways to tap into the funding, and there are some ways to kind of pace the cost as you move through the process. Okay. Pam, I'll turn it back over to you.
Sure. Okay, and I'm going to try to scroll through in order, but I'll rely on you to let me know if we're missing anyone's question, because we're not trying to leave anybody out. In terms of when is the site visit, that's kind of outlined on here roughly, that if for programs that submit a complete self-study report by this September 30th, they would be getting ready for a site visit in the spring of 2018. So generally spring is generally March, sometime into the beginning of April. For programs that submit a complete self-study report by the March 31st deadline, then those site visits would take place in the fall, which are generally in October, sometimes into the very beginning of November. So I think we capture that piece in the schedule. Okay, no. Scroll back up. Okay, in terms of being a one-person faculty member or a one faculty member program, I think that model is pretty common within our system. And then Linda, thanks for your reply there as well, that experience is one that you're familiar with. I want to echo what Martha said a little while ago about building community, that I think oftentimes for all programs, but in a special way, I think for programs which have just one full-time faculty member, having the opportunity to come together with others who may be in a similar situation or may have different perspectives from being in a larger program can really help make this feel less isolating, and can help in practical ways as well as through the various kinds of support. We do twice a year, just before the annual conference and then in November, and then just before the Professional Learning Institute in June. We do a full day workshop, which can be a chance to get together face-to-face with some of these other programs. And that can be really something to consider too as you're beginning to launch this process or wherever you may be within the self-study. But yes, definitely, I think there are unique challenges, but also unique opportunities by doing this as a small program. The programs that we hear often with lots and lots of faculty members, we sometimes hear challenges and opportunities from that side as well. So I think getting to hear the different perspectives can be really helpful there.
And Pam, I think there's a question about the self-study and when to start collecting the data, but I think you'll probably answer that when we get that piece around it. And I saw one other question around the relationship with CAPE. And so I'll, if we've got time at the end, we can talk a little bit more about that. But we do have, if you go to NAEYC.org/higher ed, you'll see on that page that we've got a couple of documents that outline NAEYC's relationship to CAPE and what are the similarities and differences between our accreditation system for higher ed, and then the recognition system that we support through our partnership with CAPE. So, and I will, and I'll send out that link too when we follow up with the recording of this webinar. So. Great.
Perfect. Thank you so much for helping organize some of these questions. It's wonderful to see so much active, everyone coming through together. I'll respond quickly to, there's a question up there about what does the annual fee cover during the accreditation process. And that is really related to what Mary was saying in terms of the profession establishing accreditation mechanisms as a mechanism of self-governance. So thinking through all that needs to happen in order for programs to maintain their accreditation, thinking through the resources, workshops in person and online that we provide, being able to guide programs at different points in the process. We may hear from programs at different stages in their annual reports and between annual reports about faculty changes, different sorts of program changes that need our guidance in terms of how to maintain their accreditation through that. As well as just ensuring that, as an accrediting body that's housed within our parent organization of NAEYC, that, that we are contributing in a way as a self-sustaining accreditation system. So I don't know if that captured it or if Mary wants to chime in further, but that's sort of a rough overview of the annual fee there.
Yeah, no, I think you covered it. So good.
Okay, so we'll keep it on. Martha, again?
Because there seems to be a lot of questions around fees and supporting it. One of the great things that I've observed, having gone through the CAPE system with Northern Arizona University, as well as being a peer reviewer and commissioner, is that this process really gets the attention of others on campus, your Office of Institutional Research, your academic deans, and so forth. And so I think it's a good way to start building a case for accreditation. In my former life, I was a college dean at a university, and there was no about accreditation for our dental program or our nursing program or massage therapy. So I think part of it is demonstrating how this really strengthens and highlights the institution and supports student learning outcomes. And so it's almost like it's making the case for the value added of accreditation. And I'll stop there.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Martha. That's a really helpful perspective to keep in mind, that sometimes this process is the first time that some early childhood programs have had some maybe challenging conversations with folks at various levels of institutional administration, and that, as you've said, that can often lead to very positive outcomes for the program. So thank you. Thank you. I'm going to see if I can move. So basically, I think we kind of covered, kind of the bottom part after the successful accreditation decision. The system kind of loops around then as the programs get ready for renewal. And I know there's a couple of folks here on the call whose programs are getting close to renewal time. So we appreciate your shared perspective of experience there as well. So just in the interest of time, we'll kind of go quickly through these eligibility requirements. This is really when we refer to that application stage. You'll have your first chance at the application phase to really document how your program is meeting these basic level eligibility pieces. The institution that the program lives in is accredited by one of the 6 regional accrediting bodies. The second bullet, not having been designated as low performing, we've started to get some questions. This applies only at the baccalaureate and master's degree levels, as my understanding that Title II of the Higher Education Act is focused on those degree levels. So some associate degree programs might not be familiar with that term, and that's because it's operating in that other world there. So no need for worries there. We want to make sure that it is a specialized degree in early childhood or child development with at least 18 credit hours of early childhood coursework. And one of the things that we're learning through the pilot phase, I think, with the baccalaureate and master's degree program is really thinking through what that looks like in terms of the program's purposes and intended goals and outcomes. So we really encourage you, for some programs, this is an easy checkbox that, programs may have 36 hours of child development, and it's, it's instantly clear what the candidates are being prepared for. In other cases, as we look to expand across the degree levels, we're becoming aware of lots of fantastic programs with all sorts of different goals. and expectations for candidates. So we encourage you to give us a call. That we are continuing to learn in this area as well. And so if there are questions around this one or really any of the eligibility pieces, as you're starting to look at the application, that's another great time to give us a call. The fourth bullet there about field and clinical experiences is one that we delve into more deeply in Standard 7 in evaluating the quality of those field experiences. At the eligibility stage, it's a matter that there are field experiences at some place in the program. So you may find that you offer some, and that part of your self-study work may involve developing additional experiences or expanding or something to meet Standard 7, and that's absolutely fine. The program needs to have graduated at least somebody, one person, before the application would be considered complete. And then the last bullet I think on there is about the eligibility requirement for at least one full-time faculty member. And then there are some specific qualifications for that one person. So programs with lots of faculty will sometimes ask us, well, does everybody have to meet all of this? And so no, this is a requirement that there needs to be at least one person who has, and you'll see there's a graduate degree with a little asterisk, we'll explain in a minute, that at least one person needs to have a graduate degree in early childhood education, child development, or child and family studies, or a related field with at least 18 graduate credits in one of those. This is one that often leads to a lot of really productive phone calls. So if the person that you're thinking of to meet this requirement has a degree that's in something else, such as reading, as a reading specialist or elementary education background, we have some ways that we can work through with transcript review and having you submit documentation of the actual work and research that that person did within the class. So we try to be as inclusive as possible. And so if you're having any questions about whether somebody's particular qualifications will meet that, then we'll go ahead and we can talk through that. So at the associate degree level, the faculty member needs to have a graduate degree. If it's a baccalaureate or master's degree program, those are the degree level there is elevated, and that's all spelled out in the handbook as well. Perfect. Okay. So as you delve in then to the self-study work, we think about these three circles where the self-study report is really divided into part 1 and part 2. Part 1 is focused on the program context, accreditation criteria, which are spelled out in the A through E boxes to the right. Then as you get further in, you think about all the learning opportunities within the program where candidates have opportunities to learn and practice related to the standards. Those then will be culminating in either 5 or 6 what we call key assessments, where you're going to be presenting data, documenting candidate performance so that you know that they're gaining proficiency on the standards. And so as the circles get smaller and smaller, it kind of takes you into the heart of the process in some ways that ultimately, if what the accreditation system is measuring is candidate proficiency on the standards, then you kind of think of the key assessments as being central in a lot of ways to that process, but very much supported by learning opportunities related to the standards all the way throughout, and then the contextual pieces that support that in all those areas I'm not going to read through over there to the right. Perfect. Thanks. So as we think about standards, we have some guiding principles that I'm not going to read word for word, but the idea that these really are learner-centered competency-based standards. These reflect consensus from the field based on research, best practice. The idea is that the standards should encourage innovation, not squelch anybody's creative thinking in any way. And that there are pieces that are woven throughout all the standards. And we specifically highlighted there diversity, inclusion, technology, birth through 8 focus, so that when you look at the professional preparation standards, we really encourage you to look at the full standards publication. I think it's about 110 pages. It's available as a free download on the public part of our website, as well as, as among our resources. And so to really consider the full depth and breadth of the supporting explanations for each of those standards as you work toward achieving that within your program. So then on the next slide, as we look at each standard individually, it's kind of another way of visualizing that. Each one has an introductory statement. Each one is broken down into key elements. And those key elements you're going to see reflected again then in the self-study report template, where you'll have a chance to show your alignment with learning opportunities and key assessments related to each key element of each of the standards as a way of touching on some of the different pieces that get at the depth and breadth of the standards. There's also, of course, a supporting explanation for each standard, and then don't get too burned out before the end of the standards book, because there are some rubrics toward the back that apply across the standards and help to define the expectations for what's being looked for in the system. So the next slide really just has a quick summary of standards 1 through 7. I'm not going to read that word for word because my sense is that most of you are probably pretty familiar, whether you're new to accreditation or not. These standards in many ways have been guiding your work, and so you'll want to keep those at the forefront, as well as looking through the full standards publication. When we think about the parts of a key assessment, then, so this is how you're going to be demonstrating candidate proficiency on the standards, that can also be broken down into 4 parts. And so when we refer to the key assessment, we refer to all 4 parts together, which can be helpful because I think different institutional contexts, some institutions may mean just the student instructions are the key assessment, or may use that term in different ways. So when we talk about key assessments, you'll have a chance in your accreditation materials to describe the assessment briefly, and then provide the actual directions as they're given to the candidates, which can sometimes be a step forward. I think in cases where previously maybe some assessments, some programs had been giving directions just verbally, or they might be given different ways depending whether the candidate is online or face-to-face. So the system requires then that there's one set of directions that are given to the candidates for that assessment. Part 3 now on the bottom left has to do with the rubrics that are used to evaluate candidate work, and we have a number of resources to help with rubric development to really be sure that as you're gathering data, that really those are going to turn out to be useful to you. I want to re-emphasize what Mary mentioned earlier, that all parts of this process should feel useful, and so when you're going through this trouble of finalizing your candidate directions, developing these rubrics to measure the candidate performance, that ultimately that leads to number 4, that data from the key assessment that you'll then be able to use in your program towards some benefit, to answer some question that you wanted to know, that can help lead to positive program changes. And so in the next slide, it kind of highlights that process a bit of how, starting from the context of all the criteria pieces, building on the framework with the standards, you then have the learning opportunities in that middle section number 3, but with the assessments and then the data from the key assessments as having the stars there at the end, in terms of really giving you information that you can then use, because you may find if the candidates are doing really well in a particular standard or a particular aspect of a standard, you can look to that to see, well, how can we improve our candidates' performance somewhere else? Or maybe it's a matter of reordering some of the learning opportunities so that it comes before the candidates are assessed on something that came up later in the program. That third bullet, we actually went back and forth a little about whether to add some stars in there or not too, because we don't want to undervalue any part of this. And I think as you're thinking through where the key assessments fit within the program, it really is important to keep that full context of the standards being front and center as you're preparing the candidates all the way through the journey there. And so it looks like we haven't had questions popping in. I want to not discourage anybody from, we're kind of going quickly, but if questions are popping into your mind, we want to encourage you to jot them down, and we will certainly get to as much as we can by the end, and follow up with everyone as needed. So just real quickly, I know we had some questions earlier specific to the site visit. So just to get a little preview of what that involves, the peer reviewers are your peers. They take that very seriously. They are here to support your work, and they always begin with a learning of the program context. We like to say standards without standardization. And one of the strengths of our system is really how programs can look so very different in all different parts of the country, or even across the road from one another. So the peer reviewers do value learning the program context. They then will gather evidence from the self-study report, which they've read in advance, as well as the 3 days that they spend visiting your campus. And then they'll produce a report of their findings, which is shared back with you as well as with the commission. In terms of the accreditation piece and or decision-making piece, and Martha may get to that a little bit too, so that after the peer review report is finalized, the program does have a chance to submit a response to that. And so, as Martha will share in a minute, the commission will get all three of those pieces: the self-study report, the peer review report of their findings, as well as the program response. So just to wrap up one other piece on the visit schedule, we have a little table here that summarizes roughly what to look for. They almost always take place on a Sunday through Wednesday. So the team arrival column takes place on Sunday evening, beginning with the team meeting over dinner. They spend Monday and Tuesday meeting with you, the administrators, faculty, community stakeholders, students, as well as reviewing documents, visiting course websites, taking a tour of the different resources available on campus. All those sorts of activities are combined into Monday and Tuesday. And then the visit will conclude Wednesday morning with an exit report session where they can share their findings. So I think I will pause here and turn it over to Martha to highlight the commission's role in particular.
And that is a good segue because the peer reviewers are so vital to this process in going out and being the eyes and ears of the commission. Also, I just wanted to note that the commission does look at all the evidence. You look at the peer review report, self-study report, any responses to the site visit and the peer review report. And so there's a very systematic way that this timeline falls out. The commissioners have a window of time in which to review all of this evidence, reading the peer review report, and then conducting our own initial report and posting it to our platform of Basecamp. So it's a very interactive process and very intensive. So the commission also makes the accreditation decision based on the evidence that's presented. We have other responsibilities. We have 3 committees, and each commissioner serves on either the training or professional development committee for the system, as nominations committee, or as policy and procedures. So there's work in addition to the meetings that take place. We do meet face-to-face twice a year in DC, as well as have virtual meetings in between. So that timeline is very important, so that in the process, including staff, or I'd like to say the team, because they're so supportive at NAEYC, has the time they need to ensure that we're being very transparent and giving each program the full attention it deserves. Just another note about the peer reviewers, and this is what Pam said or Mary said, is that they are very from associate degree programs. The accreditation decision there are 3 outcomes. One is accredited, that the standards are substantially met. The other is accredited with conditions. They're substantially met, but there's some concern, and this isn't in any way punitive. I want to be very clear about that. What this means is there's room for improvement, and that follows very much with the continuous quality improvement and strengths-based approach for this program. So get feedback, and then they use that as part of this process to continue to improve whatever areas were identified as conditions, so that those are fully met 2 years. The final is not accredited for initial programs and probation for renewal. The commission takes these decisions very, very seriously. We have certain protocols that we follow. So we are aware of any potential conflict of interest. We follow very specific procedures in our deliberations, in our voting, and documentation. I will stop there.
Right. Thanks, Martha. And I just wanted to jump in to build on what you were saying too. Is for the commission is that it has The commission has faculty administrators on there that is represented across the degree levels. And so I think that's been one of the strengths of the accreditation system, and the commission, in terms of the composition of the commission, that we've always had representation at the associate, baccalaureate, master's degree, doctoral level, and we see that as well in our peer reviewer pool. And so I just wanted to put into context, as given that we've expanded our system across the degree levels in this last year, one of the reasons we felt like we were really well positioned to do that is that because we've had representation across the degree levels in the peer reviewer pool and the commission pool. And so we felt like that there is a very, that all of those individuals and together collectively have a real understanding of what early childhood degree programs look like across degree levels, degree types, across that whole landscape. Pam, I'll turn it back over to you.
Perfect. Perfect. Thanks so much. So I think actually a lot of these resources are things that we have talked about as they've come up during the call. The pre-conference workshops just before the annual conference and Professional Learning Institute, as well as there are individual sessions during the actual conference and Professional Learning Institute as well. Programs often find it helpful if you're able to travel down a day early and really get that deep dive before heading in, but whatever fits with your schedules and availability, those are often very helpful. The online resource library we mentioned, as once your program enters into self-study, you're able to access the various resources and community discussion space that's in there. We offer a number of free webinars that, so a couple of the questions here that we'll be able to get to briefly. I see we're starting to get some questions about data and assessments and things within the self-study report. We do dive into those much more deeply as programs are getting ready to submit their self-study reports and their annual reports. So we have webinar recordings of past sessions, and as well as you'll have the chance to participate live in those as well. We have various opportunities throughout the year, and particularly if you're finding that there may be interest within your NAEYC affiliate where you are, and or state agencies or other partnerships. I saw there was somebody mentioned having gotten a grant to work on some of their work. If there are ever opportunities where it would be helpful to have someone from NAEYC participate in a state meeting or something similar with a whole group of programs interested in moving forward together at the same time, that's definitely something that we can work with you on, and would value the chance to do that. I don't know if this is a time, so we can kind of go back and forth, but before the questions, there is some good news, and I didn't think to mention it back on that first chart, so those who have stuck around for the end of the webinar get to hear about this good news first, that if you submit that application before December 1st or by December 1st, there is a chance to get a 20% discount on the application fee. So while this is not a multi-million-dollar opportunity, that it is at least some outreach that we are really looking forward to partnering with you, and sometimes just having that opportunity can encourage administrators or others to move forward with something that might have been lurking in the back of your mind. So we hope that many of you will take advantage of that opportunity, and look forward to some applications from some of you later this fall.
All right.
And I think this is our official Q&A time, so so we can kind of scroll through what's in here, but we hope if anyone was feeling hesitant to type in, that you'll feel free to go ahead and type as we're talking, and we'll make sure and get everyone's questions answered the best that we can.
Pam, we had a good question here. One of the questions is, with the key assessments, is it best to focus each one on only one standard or all of the standards, or on all of the standards? So.
And that is a fantastic question. Once you have access to the self-study report template, you'll see that there's a section in the middle with a chart where you can line up exactly where you're intending your alignments to be. So you have the standards going down one column with the assessments going across the other way, and you can put a little X or check where you feel like things align. And I think of the two approaches suggested in the question, a lot of programs do start from either one of those places. That there are some programs that try to start aligning just one assessment per standard, like key assessment 1 with standard 1 and number 2 with number 2. There are other programs that start by trying to align everything with everything. So they'll put an X in pretty much every box in the whole chart. What we find is that either one of those approaches can lead to some different sets of challenges, and that really there's often a happy medium where if each of your assessments could be measuring about 2 or 3 standards, let's say, that's not a hard and fast requirement. We sometimes hear that I heard NAEYC is now requiring 2 or 3, you know, that we don't have a set way that those alignments need to be set up. But we hear from the experience of programs, and we see as these come to Martha and her colleagues on the commission, that the programs that manage to align around 2 or 3 assessments for each of the standards are often in the best position when it comes to collecting enough data in terms of getting the depth and breadth of the standard, while also not being so inundated with data that don't really maybe even all align as fully, that they're then swamped, you know, thinking about the person who wrote in about being just one person, you know, thinking about how much data is going to pile on your desk and how you're really going to make that useful in terms of being usable for your program. So that is a terrific question. Thank you. And I think there's some questions here about particular data collection systems that go along with that. And so we just want to emphasize from NAEYC's point of view, there is not a requirement that you need a fancy, expensive software package. Some programs find that those things work well for them and fit with their budget and their program size, and that's fine. We do have programs that use those. We also have programs that are smaller and smaller budgets that go along with that and do just fine with much lower tech arrangements. So there really is a whole range there.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I see someone asked about how if they wanted to apply, how do they identify themselves for the 20% discount? And so you can just simply, when you submit your application, you'll see the email box. You can send it to highered@naec.org and just included that email that you attended the webinar. So we and my colleague who manages that process has everyone's name who's registered for this. So you'll just indicate you were part of the webinar for that.
Perfect. And I see there's a question up above. One of the accreditation decisions, one of the possibilities is that it could go through the commission process with a non-accredited decision. The question was whether the program then would pay for another visit. So in most cases, if a program receives a non-accredited decision, the program has the option, which most programs, I would say, or many programs would take advantage of the chance to then return to self-study. So it wouldn't be starting all over again with a new application for eligibility. The program would just recognize there is more work to be done in that self-study phase. And when they would get back to the phase of having a visit, so there would be another visit with the fee associated with that. I think hopefully we can work with programs before that. You know, as Mary and Martha both said, the intent is to be supportive and helping programs be successful all the way through the process. So we encourage you to stay in regular touch. You know, if you're not feeling clear on whether your program is ready to move forward with the self-study report being finalized and ready to get to that point of scheduling a site visit, you know, give us a call. You know, we can't, from a staff point of view, we can't look at an assessment and say, yep, that looks aligned to me, you know, and risk having it have a different decision at the commission level. But we can certainly help talk through questions with you and help you get to a place where you're feeling confident and ready, so that hopefully we would avoid that kind of situation as much as we can.
Great. I see we've got a question here too about when to start collecting the student data for the assessments. So,
yeah, you know, and feel free to chime in with other, you know, it used to be with first-time programs, our message for much of the first 10 years of the system was first-time programs, you don't need to have any data in your initial self-study report, that you could wait, get the feedback on the assessments, and then start collecting data at that point. What we really found was that it is actually helpful for first-time programs to have some data to present with your self-study report, primarily not so much for the data themselves as for the evidence that you've actually used the assessment at least once, because I think anyone who's ever piloted a new assessment with your students will probably realize that just the experience of using it once, you realize on your own, oh, here's what I need to tweak and do this a little differently next time and make those adjustments just as a natural part of the process. So, you know, so we did switch then to a requirement that first-time programs should have data in their first self-study report. But it is a requirement just for one application of data. We sometimes have questions about use of the word application there, and we're open to other lingo. But the idea is that if you give the assessment once a year, you might have data, you know, a new column in your data table just once a year. If the assessment comes up every semester, one application of data would be one semester's worth of data. So it doesn't need to be, you know, years and years before, you know, that it often is helpful to go through that process in enough time that you're able then to get feedback on the actual assessments themselves without worrying that you need to have volumes worth of data to impress the reviewers, if really what they're looking for is the well-aligned assessments along with the system for collecting and using the data from those.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I think I see one more question, and then I know we're at our time, so I'll wrap it up after that. But there was a question around, having a timeline or a pacing guide for how they move through that self-study process, and I think that's a great question, and I think that's one of the resources that we'll be creating, that we want to create, is just some ways in which you might want to work through the self-study process. One of the first steps, as Pam said, the very first step you would do is submit that application, and it is not time-consuming. So it really just focuses in on those eligibility questions that we talked about at the beginning of the webinar. So once you submit that, you then get access to the online resource library, where you get access to the self-study report template. And that's important because one of the faculty have told us that one of the most helpful things that they do when they begin the self-study process is to look at the learning opportunities chart that's in that template, and they use that chart to map out their current learning opportunities across all of the standards. And that's been a really helpful way for them to then identify where they might be very strong in providing opportunities for some of the standards, and it may also show that they have some gaps in other areas of the standards. So I encourage you to use that once you get access to the template, to use that chart, and that could be a really helpful exercise to do with your faculty, both your full-time and adjunct faculty together, to identify those opportunities across your entire program, and that'll give you a really big leg up in terms of trying to identify assessments that you might want to use as key assessments, and again, just identify some of those gap areas that might exist in your program. Pam, is there anything you want to add to that, or is it?
I think you've captured it.
Okay,
great.
Well, so I know we are at the 3 o'clock hour, so I want to be mindful of time, but there are lots of ways to learn more about this. As Pam mentioned, some of the pre-conference workshop and sessions we have coming up at annual conference. I've included on here the email box for us, and we really encourage you to reach out to us with any questions that you might have, and we have a lot more information on the NAEYC website. And we also really encourage people to consider becoming a peer reviewer. It's a great way to learn about the accreditation process, see it from the inside, and you glean some insights from programs that you visit, that you might visit as part of your work as a peer reviewer. So again, if you go to our website, there's information on becoming a peer reviewer and that process for applying for that as well. But in the meantime, since we've reached the 3 o'clock hour, I just want to thank everyone for being with us this afternoon, for your interest in the accreditation system, and for the ongoing work that you are doing to prepare early childhood educators. We are deeply appreciative of the work that you do, and we are eager to support you in your efforts. So thank you for being with us. We hope you have a great afternoon, and please be in touch with us if we can answer any questions you have. Talk to you later.
Thank